All right, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming again. As Rocco mentioned, this is our fourth in this professional development web series sponsored by the Ad Hoc Professional Development Committee of WPWV ACRL. Today, we have Sally Brown, who is our exhibits coordinator with WVU Libraries. She's also an artist and writer who focuses on women in feminist art and curatorial accessibility. She has an MA in art history, an MPA in nonprofit administration, and a BA in studio art. Her art has been exhibited in both the US and the United Kingdom, and she has won two awards for illustration. Her work has been published in Hyperallergenic, Bitch Magazine, and Women's Art Journal, among others. Today, she is presenting on art, library, and the community during crisis and isolation continued. With that said, I'm going to step back and allow Sally to begin. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's a nice small group this afternoon. I appreciate you joining me. I'm really excited to discuss art in any capacity, especially with fellow library workers and enthusiasts, so thank you. So the last time I spoke about art, libraries, and community during crisis and isolation was in April, early on in the 2020 pandemic. And the discussions around art making during this time and recollections of pandemic art of the past had just begun. Relooking at my original presentation and research, I found lots of new discussions, articles, and resources around the topics I covered. Moreover, it has definitely impacted and involved my work as exhibits coordinator for WVU Libraries, a position I am so grateful to have. Note this artwork by prominent feminist artist Judy Chicago. I'll get back to it later in the presentation. Also, my colleague and usual virtual program co-host, interdisciplinary librarian Beth Torin is here. She will be linking the URLs that I discuss in the corresponding images with the presentation. I'm also happy to share my presentation as a PDF if anyone is interested. And you're welcome to ask questions in the chat, but I'll probably wait until the end. It's not a very long presentation to answer them. So in this presentation, I'll introduce the current state of art during pandemic as isolation, briefly describe the development of our Art in the Libraries program and how the pandemic has impacted our programming, and conclude with some poignant works by contemporary artists created during the pandemic, because that's my favorite thing. Throughout the presentation, you may notice my working philosophy, which is a collaborative, community-centric curator, rather than a curator as director. Part of the beauty of working in a library, an accessible and service-focused organization, rather than a fine art-centric, market or canonical-focused institution, is that concurrently, I both curate and develop community while creating accessible, informational, and interesting exhibits with such a diverse array of people. I'll come back to this in a moment, but I wanted to make you aware throughout my presentation. To back up, looking at this era in terms of visual culture and its impact, last time I pointed to the plethora of imagery we see on media and how it's increased so much even since April, and how we can easily take this for granted in both positive and negative ways. Being oversaturated with advertisements, memes, and the like can be overwhelming, but also art is more accessible now than ever. Add to that our new reliance on virtual meeting technology and how this transforms relationships and experiences. Creative too in new ways. Unable to physically shake hands or meet in art spaces and find meetings of the minds and eyes, our new platform lets us into personal or imagined spaces, meeting family and pets, posters or dreamlands. Perhaps a new groundedness emerges as we share this platform. Perhaps seeing art too on this new platform grounds the viewing experience. From seeing it at a distance on the wall at a pristine museum or gallery, to seeing it in our homes on a screen just like everyone else. I mentioned this last time, that virtual tours are expanding, allowing us to see artwork and architecture across the world. I offered some ideas last time. Here are a few: seeing Mona Lisa up close on the website versus seeing it in person, as you can see in the photo with the crowd in front of you with all the phones. Georgia O'Keeffe's collection, seeing it online versus seeing it in a pristine space of the museum. Virtual talks and art performances are also evolving, allowing us to be in somewhat of a space with artists, curators, and other movers and shakers we might not otherwise have the means to. Also, placing these highly esteemed folks instead of behind a platform on a stage, like you can see this tiny photo of artist Faith Ringgold on the right at Yale a few years ago, to a room in their home on their screen, just like us, as you can see the artist in conversation on the left just recently. Of course, we already had social media live outlets, but programming available virtually has grown. Artist administrators crowdsourcing virtual talks to expand access and opportunity across the world. Some with low ticket prices, mostly free, these programs are now available at our fingertips. To be sure, this privileges those without technology or internet, so unfortunately not completely solving accessibility issues with art. However, this is where libraries can be so key. Public libraries exist for the community, acting as idea and information protectors, and offering resources in a neutral, preserving space. Academic libraries can act in this role as well for their campus community and, when possible, their larger academic and residential communities. The library's main mission isn't one of exhibiting or collecting art. Libraries, along with galleries, archives, and museums, seek innovative ways to engage and evolve learning. As library content becomes digital and learning becomes more engaged virtually, exhibitions provide new ways of engaging library users' intellect and creativity. Libraries evolve into a new sort of space, physically and digitally. Still a space for research, learning, and study, as librarians work and engage with users from home, but also for community engagement and collaboration, presenting a unique opportunity for both collaborating artists and scholars and viewers who might not be seeking exhibitions, but will find themselves. And in this time of pandemic isolation, such creative programs can be uplifting, provide solace, inspiration, or new perspective from home. WVU Artland Libraries program was developed in 2015 to showcase university faculty work. It is expanded to be a program unique to other art organizations on campus to provide true interdisciplinary, cross-campus, and community or collaborative exhibitions featuring diverse scholarship and creative work through integrated designs and interpretive curation. And recently, we are also integrating more virtual content. Our first online exhibit was Remix, a call to community members to submit digital and print collages using the West Virginia and Regional History Center online archives in 2019. We continue creating online exhibits on women suffragists and other West Virginia people in history, and in conjunction with our print exhibitions, thanks to many student workers who work on these projects with me. Of course, many of our programs focus on bolstering awareness for WVU students, faculty, and staff, such as collaborations with classes in graphic design, history, painting, multidisciplinary studies, and even business. We jury a student art award via the College for Creative Arts and host our own staff faculty exhibit award, providing a new mode of exposure and publishing for scholarship and creative work. We also work with our expert librarians to document many of the exhibits on our research repository, as well as create LibGuides around the exhibition topics to further contextualize and provide curriculum resources. Other projects represent our bridge from WVU campus to broader community. Most notably, the spearheading of the Morgantown Public Art Guide, a community collaborative effort, and opening our exhibits, programs, and archives up to community voices, such as that the West Virginia and Regional History Center is doing now to document our community during this era. The most recent prominent example of Artland Libraries bridging these communities is Undefeated, canvassing the politics around voter suppression since women's suffrage. This is an online exhibit and forthcoming print exhibit. Undefeated, our third such large juried exhibit, featuring contributions from scholars, practitioners, and creative artists. As exhibits coordinator, I curated, with designers and librarians, their multidisciplinary work together into a cohesive exhibition with themes, an online exhibit, and print specific to the space of the main campus library, building on and challenging the boundaries of both publications and exhibitions. Undefeated builds on the notions of libraries as information and documentarians and protectors. The process is vast, from the development of the idea and outline for call for submissions, to integrating content, fundraising, and promotion. This exhibit came together in honor of the American Suffrage Centennial, and an exhibit committee was formed with regional scholars and practitioners to write the educational content and help, along with the Art and Libraries Committee, to jury the artwork. We decided on the round format as canvas, in reference to the round campaign button, and continued individualized piece of fashion, which can so simply put forth political ideas. We received over 100 submissions from artists across the nation. The above artist, Peter Zerlein, is from Germany. Currently based in Boston, his work has been featured in the Washington Post, New York Times, among others. Sheila Queller-Schaefer is originally from Colombia. Currently based in Pittsburgh, she's won several awards, grants, and has exhibited in major institutions. There are also WVU students, faculty, staff, and West Virginia community artists included in the exhibit, alongside the content written by the expert committee. We raised funding from grants and area partners to support the design, printing, and installation of the exhibit, and selected the art and gathered all of the educational content by the expert committee by early spring 2020. But we all know what happened next. We had already decided on the idea to springboard from the Suffrage Centennial and Anniversary of Voting Rights Act of 1965 in a more contemporary way, pointing to the various aspects of voter suppression that aren't widely understood or discussed. Long lines to vote, inconvenient voting location, misinformation, purging of registered voters, voter photo ID requirements, etc. We knew it would be relevant and controversial with the upcoming 2020 election, but we had no idea how relevant it would be with the pandemic impacting voting and the recentered Black Lives Matter movement. Once the pandemic hit, however, we had to rethink how to further develop the exhibition considering the current climate, physically, virtually, and with respectful mindfulness. After many discussions, we decided to make a long-form version of the exhibition online, including the full text of the expert committee, with an abbreviated, more visual print version to come later, including a virtual tour that will be available. We already had content related to many Black Lives Matter issues, including disenfranchisement, Jim Crow laws, and gerrymandering. And we added another section, making the issues even more current. As previously mentioned, just like other organizations, we began our virtual program series in April on topics from community, personal and activist crafting, to poetry and creative writing. And in collaboration with a group of area nonprofits dedicated to spreading awareness for the Suffrage Centennial, a series of virtual programs around voter suppression. Co-hosted by Beth Torin, interdisciplinary librarian, who helps with technology and documentation of the series on YouTube, as you can see here. This allows us to further contextualize the complex and sensitive issues in a timely and open format. Our continued virtual program series examining voter suppression, as well as other upcoming exhibitions and programming, such as Dime Novels, Racialization and Erasure, curated by WVU English professor Nancy Caronia. You can see the illustration of the book cover on the left there. It's titled Nick Carter. And the Global to Local film series In Conjunction, which is the image in the middle. That's a film entitled Safe. Exemplify our continued commitment to inquiring and discussing these issues that affect us all. These issues are on the mind of the Art and Libraries Committee as we curate exhibitions and programs to create even more awareness in the work we do. As our work is so public and visual, our exhibitions and programs play a big role in the transmission and communication of library values. Our current exhibition opportunities topically also exude our values of exploring social justice and developing community. Our librarians play a key role in both exhibit content and bringing the exhibits to the community. With our next big exhibit call, Around Food Justice, we are collaborating with the WVU Food Justice Lab. Our science librarian is helping with the LibGuide and promoting the call. Emphasizing the community focus, we are calling for creative and scholarly work around various themes of food justice, from anyone that eats, that is, everyone. This and our newly announced Art of the Mask online exhibit call are both open to folks inside and outside WVU to try to bridge these connections that can be easily divided. Moreover, we are documenting an emblem over times. Masks have become a signal of caring and gesture of community in themselves. Now you may have seen a theme throughout my presentation. My method or philosophy of curating is concurrently collaborating and developing community while curating content and artwork to create accessible, thought-provoking exhibits. This curator as collaborator method, rather than one authoritarian voice director, came out of my graduate studies around feminist art, curating, and especially artist Judy Chicago. I wrote hundreds of pages about activist curating and continue to research, write, and present about it, notably as it pertains to curating in libraries. So if you ever want to talk about activist curating, let me know. So this brings me back to the first image on the first slide by contemporary artist Judy Chicago. I studied her work extensively in grad school for art history, and her ability to create work always with educational or social justice intent for broad audiences. It's accessible, interesting, and provocative work. This piece she created this year, titled Always Darkest Before Dawn, urging her audiences to face climate change using artwork and text. Ever since my master's studies, I have had this philosophy to work as accessibly as possible through the exhibits, while also always paying attention to the voices given wall space, and now virtual space, considering the history of such underrepresentation. As I said last time, I can't have a presentation without mentioning Judy Chicago and touching on some artists. So I'll briefly explore what a few contemporary artists are creating during the pandemic. Last time I mentioned the spread of public art around the pandemic. Now, portraits of essential workers have evolved into a new artistic trope, such as these: the public art by a collective in New York, and illustrations by contemporary artists. Such depictions are tantamount to this time, both as officially deemed essential workers, as well as who artists choose to feature and depict as important. Notably here is the groundedness with which these artists create using colored pencils, are the media for the latter, perhaps exuding the groundedness of the subjects, the artist's joy of drawing with everyday material, or the inability of the artist to get higher end media due to the pandemic's feasibility or impact on their finances. In my last presentation, I mentioned museums inviting visitors to challenges, such as recreating a famous artwork with household materials, broadening accessibility, and bringing humor and play to isolation. Contemporary artists are also evolving their practices to invite participation from social media or otherwise, such as Liza Lou's Apart Together. Apart Together is a community art project founded by the artist on the onset of COVID to foster connection and creativity during a time of social distancing and isolation. Lou encourages Instagram followers to make work from familiar materials around the house and tag it with her Apart Together and archives it on her website. What started as an exercise in combating long-term isolation has grown into a global community of makers eager to share. As an accessible open art project, I completely love this. Anyone can participate and everyone can view and appreciate the project. It's warm, intimate, personal, while also being enormous, inspirational, and broadly impactful. Other artists explore isolation during the pandemic, such as feminist artist Renee Cox, considering self-exploration. She considers the multiplicity of the self in this moment of collective inwardness depicted in this self-portrait. As Cox notes, this is a perfect time for artists and everyone to explore themselves. Other artists are documenting on a more macro lens. Prominent Chinese activist artist Ai Weiwei worked fast, creating a documentary film, Coronation, documenting happenings in the city of Wuhan, China during the pandemic, and how the country's government and citizens have responded to and been impacted by the outbreak. Weiwei, like many artists, locally and internationally, also took on crafting masks and sold them on eBay this summer, raising over $1 million for various COVID-related charities. The pandemic thus allows us to see what these high-profile artists are doing, but also levels the playing field for aspiring and mid-career artists. Everyone can share their work, and everyone right now is looking. Sharing stories of what it's like to be an artist right now, from high-profile New York artists to artists working in small-town West Virginia. Creates a more grounded view of what the arts and art scene are. Live social media creating and media covering from national to local creates community, not only among artists, but among the audience. The arts have also played a pivotal role in the Black Lives Matter movement, which has gained momentum, though art around this issue has been around for a long time. Such as the previously mentioned artist Renee Cox has been making art around Black Lives Matter for decades. Still, there is so much art around this movement, I can hardly select a few to feature. Here's a recent personal favorite, a cover designed by Jordan Castile, and a few portraits there of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. I encourage you to jump on the WVU Library's Black Lives Matter LibGuide, which has several resources around its expression through art. There are a plethora of more topics and avenues to discuss, and I thank you for having me, letting me divulge into my own curiosities and passion for art and libraries during this time. Last time I ended with some horrific art created during pandemics past. I also looked at funny pandemic art inspired by memes and recreated socially distanced classical art. This time I'll end it playfully with some famous art recently recreated into a campaign for safety during the pandemic. Thank you, and I'm open to questions. I'll try to open the chat.
I noticed that we did have one question from Caroline A. She asked, said, I am curious about your career path and what brought you to an academic library. Do you view yourself more as a curator or a librarian, or some combination of the two? I am starting an MLIS program and didn't realize academic libraries had curators.
Oh, this is, my background is in art history. I have a graduate degree in art history and one in public arts administration. My undergrad is in studio art. So that's a difficult question. I guess I would consider myself more of a curator, but with more of a librarian's outlook. But I think this is also a this was a newly formed position. I was the first person in this position 3 years ago. And I think it's a growing position. I don't know about now with the pandemic, but it's a growing thing to have art and libraries programs across the nation. I know a few, and some of them have library degrees and some of them have different degrees. I don't know if that answered your question. I do not. Good.
Great. Does anyone have any additional questions? Feel free to ask in the chat.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Judith. Thanks, Claire. Thank you all for joining me. Thanks, Beth, for posting all those links.
I didn't know if you saw this question, but Claire Withers is wondering about how you connect this with the classroom experience.
Well, there's several different ways. I mean, like I said in one of the slides, I collaborate with various classes on either creating art or exhibits, whether they're history exhibits or students are painting inspired by the archives. And then I also will do guest lectures, like I just did one earlier this week on my process of curating. And then also, and then we're trying to develop more LibGuides that I do with the librarians that will offer some curriculum resources for some of the exhibits, which is really helpful. Yeah, so those are some of the few of the things that we do.
Karen Diaz also asked a question. She wanted to know how you connect with students outside of the classroom through service opportunities.
Yes, thanks, Karen. Yeah, I actively like to utilize, we have the Center for Service learning at WVU. You probably all have similar things. And I'll do various opportunities, either just one-time opportunity where they help me with an event, or they can help me. I have various groups in different business or multidisciplinary studies classes that will help create an event or curate their own exhibit or help us promote. Usually I also have an intern that helps me with all of these tasks of promoting, fundraising, designing, communications. And I think it's a really fun opportunity for them, and it's also very helpful for me.
Judith asks, has your wonderful work already seen more use of library resources by people of color? What might increase that even more?
Good question. I don't even know how we would track that. That's a very good question.
It's wonderfully thorny.
Has your work been already seen? So do you mean the exhibition resources or the general library resources? What might increase that? I would love to have ideas from people, because when we do a call for art, sometimes it's really popular, and sometimes we'll get a couple hundred submissions, and then sometimes it's hard to get even 10. And so we would love to do one that is specifically focused on people of color, and that would be a good challenge to have. But as far as using the resources, I don't know, that's a good question. We definitely re-emphasized it in our art and libraries mission to be more inclusive. And I guess as simple as surveys could be the answer to that. We do surveys, but I'm not sure we ask that specific of a question, and that's a really good question. And how to increase that is an even better question that I can bring to my committee.
I have a question about that question, which is like use of the library resources by people of color, or is like the resources created by people of color, or is this a question about who's using library resources? Because I know we increased and spotlighted works created by people of color.
Yeah.
She says that she meant all of it. I assume that that means that she meant both.
Yes. I mean, that would be a question for, as far as making the library resources, I think that would be a question for maybe Dean Diaz could answer that. But as far as our exhibits, we are attempting to be very mindful about it, but we could always be more inclusive. We were very mindful about it with Undefeated, especially, but we can always be more mindful. And we're going to hopefully do an experiment with the Committee of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity, of which I am a member, to try to increase that even more. Yes, yes. Who gets to curate?
Oh, I'll say, Sally, my question was, what will become of Wherefore the Art Walks? Will there be a virtual Morgantown Art Walk? Might the libraries be involved, or might we actually do physical art walks with some kind of distancing accommodation?
Right now, because we don't want to necessarily promote gathering together, it's the plan is to do a virtual art walk, and that is something that we, the libraries, spearhead, and it's on my list to get back with all the cultural organizations on campus. We do the campus art crawl. We have participated in the community art crawl, but it seems to be that we're a little bit too far off the map. So doing a campus art crawl that encourages students to get to know the different cultural organizations on campus is good, and I think we can do it virtually, and it should be interesting. Yeah.
If there's no more questions, I do have one question myself, and it might be a little bit challenging too. You described yourself as a feminist curator. How much do you think that shapes your view of openness with collections and exhibits? I did see that even before COVID, you did make sure to have some kind of online presence for the Art in the Libraries exhibits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. We started our making online exhibits before the pandemic, and yes, my graduate studies on feminist art and curating definitely impacts my view of curating accessibly and openly every day and everything I do. And I'm so grateful to be at a library where that can happen easier. Like I said, my view is on accessibility and opening up more collaboratively with my Art and Libraries Committee and then the various experts who are on each exhibition community. So it's not me just saying this is what it is, but it's a bunch of different voices coming together, as well as artists and artwork. If that makes sense. Thank you for the question.
Alrighty, well, thank you, everyone. Are there any further questions? All right, so Sally, thank you so much for presenting for our video series. That was excellent.
Thank
you, everyone, for the participation and the great questions. We will send, we have all your emails because you're all registered, so we will send out the slides and the document in chat to you as well when we have them. And we'll also, if any is interested in offering feedback or learning more about the series or possibly submitting a proposal to participate in the series, we run once a month, you know, just a half an hour right at this time, 12 o'clock, usually the third Friday in the month. Then you're welcome to submit a presentation. We pretty much welcome all ideas, just as long as it's related to library and you feel your colleagues would benefit from it in some way. So thank you all again, and watch for that email with the slides, and also the watch in 2 weeks for information when the recording of this will go up in our YouTube channel, our Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia PDev YouTube channel. And thank you all again. I will now stop the recording.